Have you ever watched someone's smile fade when they realize their cruel joke has backfired completely? Asterisk, asterisk. My husband and parents drove away laughing, leaving me stranded in the New Mexico desert with nothing but my purse and the clothes on my back. "Let's see if she can make it back home," they shouted, 487 miles from everything I knew. They expected me to panic, to beg when they eventually returned. Instead, I disappeared from their lives entirely. For 15 years, they had no idea where I was or what happened to me, until my husband finally tracked me down. The look on his face when he found me was worth every second of what I'd endured. My name is Vanessa Harmon. I'm 39 now, but I was just 24 when everything happened. Before I tell you my story, you should know that I was once an environmental engineer with a promising career in Austin, Texas. I was the responsible one, the planner, the peacekeeper in a family that seemed to thrive on chaos and excitement. I spent my entire life trying to prove my worth to people who saw my carefulness as a character flaw. Our road trip was supposed to be a celebration. I'd recently been promoted at the environmental consulting firm where I worked, and though my husband Kyle had been oddly distant about my success, he suggested we take a vacation to reconnect, when my parents asked to join, claiming they wanted to spend time with us before their retirement cruise. I hesitated but agreed. Looking back, their insistence should have been my first warning. I'd meticulously planned our route from Austin through the Southwest, making sure we had comfortable accommodations each night and interesting stops along the way. My spreadsheets and itineraries became the subject of eye-rolling and jokes. "You need to learn to be spontaneous," my mother would say, her voice sweet but her eyes critical. "You're going to plan all the fun right out of your life." My father would chuckle and add, "That's our Vanessa." Never met a risk she wouldn't calculate. Kyle had once loved this about me, or so he claimed during our courtship. "You're my rock," he used to say. But lately he'd joined my parents in their mockery. "Seriously, babe, the world won't end if we don't follow your precious schedule." I'd smile and shrug it off, 'cause that's what I always did. Steady, reliable Vanessa. The one who would bend rather than break the peace. On the third day of our trip, Kyle suggested a detour to Roswell. "Come on, it'll be fun." Aliens and tourist trap sleds do something unplanned for once. My parents enthusiastically agreed, and I reluctantly adjusted our schedule. After spending the afternoon among tacky souvenir shops and UFO museums, we were heading back to the highway when Kyle suddenly pulled over at a scenic viewpoint. "Let's get some photos of this sunset," he said, already getting out of the car. The desert stretched before us in stunning shades of orange and red. I walked away from the car to capture the panoramic view, completely unaware that my life was about to change forever. I heard the car doors slam behind me. When I turned, our SUV was already pulling away, kicking up dust as it accelerated. For a moment, I stood frozen in disbelief. Was this some kind of joke? They wouldn't actually leave me here, would they? The SUV slowed slightly. The passenger window rolled down, and Kyle leaned across my mother to shout, "Time to loosen up, Vanessa! Let's see if you can make it back without your precious itinerary." My parents were laughing in the back seat. My father actually gave me a thumbs up, as if abandoning me on a desert highway was somehow an act of kindness. And then they were gone, disappearing around a bend in the road, leaving nothing but settling dust and silence. I stood there, unable to process what had just happened. Surely they would turn around. This had to be a prank, a cruel, thoughtless prank, but just a joke nonetheless. They'd come back in a few minutes, laughing about how I should have seen my face. 10 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. No car returned. The sun was setting rapidly, the desert temperature dropping with it. I checked my phone, no signal. Of course there wasn't. This area was notorious for dead zones, something I'd noted in my trip planning they had mocked me for. I looked down the empty highways stretching in both directions. According to the last road sign I'd seen, the nearest town was at least 12 miles away. As darkness fell and the stars emerged with startling clarity above the desert, something crystallized within me. Even if this was some misguided attempt to teach me a lesson, a fundamental trust had been broken. My husband and parents, the people who were supposed to love me most, had willingly put me in danger for their amusement. I began walking toward the distant town, each step fueling a slow-burning rage I'd never allowed myself to feel before. If they wanted to teach me about letting go of control, they were about to learn just how thoroughly I could disappear. Night descended quickly, the desert cold seeping through my light jacket. I walked steadily, trying to ignore my growing thirst and the blisters forming on my feet. My mind cycled between disbelief, fear, and an increasingly powerful anger. How long had they planned this? Had my promotion been the trigger? Was my success somehow threatening to Kyle? To my parents, who had always treated my practical nature as a disappointment? After walking for what felt like hours, headlights appeared on the horizon behind me. My heart leapt. Had they come back? But as the vehicle approached, I realized it was a pickup truck, not our SUV. I stood at the edge of the road, waving my arms. The truck slowed and stopped beside me, an older Hispanic man peering out from the driver's side. "Está bien, señora?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I explained in my rusty Spanish that I'd been left behind by my group and needed to get to the nearest town. He introduced himself as Miguel and told me he was heading to a small town about 10 miles ahead. As we drove, Miguel asked few questions, sensing my reluctance to explain how I'd ended up alone on a desert highway at night. Instead, he told me about his farm, his grandchildren, and how he made this drive twice a week to visit his sister. The town, when we reached it, was little more than a handful of buildings clustered around a gas station. Miguel insisted on making sure I had somewhere to stay before he continued his journey. "The motel there is clean," he said, pointing to a modest single-story building with a flickering vacancy sign. "My sister's friend owns it." I thanked him profusely, offering what cash I had in my wallet, which he firmly refused. "Be safe," he said simply before driving away. At the motel office, I checked my phone again. 1 bar of signal now, and a text message from Kyle. "Having fun yet? Ready to admit you need us? We'll come get you tomorrow morning. Rooms booked for you at the Desert Star Motel under my name. Love you." I stared at the message, a cold realization settling over me. He had planned this far enough in advance to book a motel room. This wasn't a spontaneous prank. This was a calculated action. The motel clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, watched me reading the message. "Everything okay, honey?" I looked up, something shifting inside me. "Actually, I'm not sure," I admitted. "Is this the Desert Star Motel?" She nodded. "Do you have a reservation under the name Kyle Harmon?" She checked her book and nodded again. "Paid in advance for 1 night." I took a deep breath. "I'm his wife, but... I don't want to stay in that room." The woman, her nameplate read. Doris looked at me more carefully. "Trouble?" "He and my parents thought it would be funny to leave me stranded out here as a joke," I said, the words sounding even more absurd spoken aloud. They drove off and left me at that scenic viewpoint down the highway. Doris's expression darkened. "That's not a joke, honey. That's just cruel. They're coming back tomorrow morning," I continued, expecting me to be grateful they didn't leave me out here forever, I guess. "And what do you want to do?" Doris asked, her voice gentle but direct. It was such a simple question, but no one had asked me what I wanted in so long. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I don't think I want to be waiting here when they arrive." Doris nodded thoughtfully. "I've got another room on the opposite side of the property, not under your husband's name. You can stay there tonight while you figure things out." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you. I can pay." She waved away my offer. "The room's paid for either way. Doesn't matter which one you sleep in the small, clean room." I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to think clearly. I had my purse with my wallet, ID, and about $200 in cash. My phone, which now showed 2 bars of signal, and the clothes I was wearing. Everything else, my suitcase, laptop, credit cards we shared, was with Kyle and my parents. I thought about calling someone, but who? Most of our friends were really Kyle's friends. My colleagues would help, but the humiliation of explaining my situation was overwhelming. How could I possibly tell anyone that my husband and parents had abandoned me in the desert as a joke? I checked my phone again. 3 missed calls from Kyle now, and another text. "Babe, call me when you get to the motel. Want to make sure you're safe? We'll pick you up first thing tomorrow." The audacity of his concern after deliberately leaving me stranded made me physically nauseous. Instead of responding, I turned off my phone. I couldn't sleep that night, my mind racing with memories reframed by this new perspective. How Kyle would undermine me in small ways I'd always ignored. How my parents consistently took his side, treating me like I was defective for being cautious and prepared. How many times had I dismissed my discomfort to keep the peace? By morning, I had made a decision. I showered, put my phone in airplane mode, and went to find Doris at the front desk. "Is there a bus station in town?" I asked. "Nearest one's in Carlsbad, about 60 miles south," she replied. "My son's heading that way in about an hour if you need a ride." "That would be amazing," I said gratefully. "And if anyone comes looking for me, ... single quotes never saw you?" Doris finished with a knowing nod. Far as I know, nobody checked into that room last night. I felt a rush of gratitude for this stranger's understanding. "Thank you. I can't explain how much this means." "Don't need to explain," she said simply. "Sometimes you just need to start fresh." As I waited for Doris's son, I wrote a brief note and asked Doris to give it to Kyle when he arrived. Asterisk. "You wanted me to learn to be more spontaneous. Congratulations. You'll never know where I've gone or who I've become. Don't try to find me." Asterisk. An hour later, I was in Doris's son's pickup truck, heading south toward Carlsbad and a future I couldn't yet imagine. Behind me, the small town receded in the distance, along with the life I had known. By the time Kyle and my parents arrived at the motel, I was already gone, leaving nothing but a short note and the echo of their laughter as they drove away from me in the desert. They had abandoned me 487 miles from home as a joke. I was about to make sure the joke was on them. The Greyhound station in Carlsbad was nothing special, just a small waiting area, attached to a convenience store with a few plastic chairs and vending machines. But to me, it represented something profound: freedom. Doris's son Jake had been quiet during our drive, respecting my obvious need for space. Before dropping me off, he handed me a brown paper bag. "Mom packed you some sandwiches and water," he explained with a shrug. "And there's $50 in there too. She said to tell you it's not charity, it's karma." I blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers when my own family had shown such cruelty. "Please thank her for me." Single quotes. Jake nodded. "Good luck, wherever you're going." That was the question, wasn't it? Where was I going? As I studied the destinations listed on the board, I realized I had no plan, an irony not lost on me, considering how my obsession with planning had apparently driven my husband and parents to such extreme measures. My phone buzzed in my purse. I'd turned it back on, but kept it on silent. 6 missed calls from Kyle, 4 from my mother, and a flurry of increasingly frantic texts. "Where are you? We're at the motel. This isn't funny. Vanessa, the front desk says you never checked in. Call me back now." I switched it to airplane mode again. Let them worry. Let them feel a fraction of the fear and confusion I'd felt standing alone in the desert. I approached the ticket counter, still unsure of my destination. "Where you headed?" asked the bored-looking clerk. I took a deep breath. "What's the farthest place I can get to from here?" He raised an eyebrow. "Running from something? Or toward something?" I countered. He shrugged and studied his computer. "I can get you to Chicago with one transfer. Leaves in 40 minutes. Chicago. A massive city where I could disappear completely. I'd visited once for a conference and remembered being overwhelmed by its size and energy. It seemed as good a place as any to reinvent myself. "Chicago it is," I said, pushing most of my cash across the counter. As the bus pulled away from the station, I watched the New Mexico landscape slide past the window. Desert giving way to scrubland, towns appearing and vanishing like mirages. With each mile, I felt the invisible threads connecting me to my old life stretching thinner. I should have been terrified. I had no job, limited cash, no place to stay in Chicago, and only the clothes I was wearing. But instead, I felt strangely calm, almost exhilarated. For the first time in my life, no one was telling me who I should be or how I should feel. The journey to Chicago took nearly 2 days. I slept fitfully on the bus, waking with stiff muscles and rumpled clothes. I rationed Doris's food and the little money I had, knowing I needed to make it last until I could figure out my next steps. During a layover in Oklahoma City, I finally turned my phone back on, bracing myself for the barrage of messages. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and texts from Kyle and my parents. I listened to one voicemail from Kyle, his voice shifting from anger to fear. "Vanessa, this isn't funny anymore. Where are you? Your parents are freaking out. I've called the police, but they say you're an adult who chose to leave. Please, just let us know you're safe." My mother's message was more dramatic, full of tears and accusations about how I was punishing them, how I was being selfish and immature. My father's was brief and cold, saying I was overreacting as usual and should Stop this nonsense. Not one of them acknowledged the cruelty of what they had done. I deleted all their messages and used the last of my phone's battery to do something that hadn't occurred to me until that moment. I logged into our joint bank account. Kyle and I had maintained separate accounts for our individual salaries, but we also had a joint account for household expenses. My recent promotion bonus, a substantial sum had been deposited there, as I'd planned to use it for home improvements. Without hesitation, I transferred half of the joint account into my personal account. It wasn't stealing, it was my money too, and less than I was entitled to if we factored in the value of everything I'd left behind. It would be enough to give me a start in Chicago. Then I removed my phone's SIM card, dropped it in a trash can, and bought a cheap prepaid phone from a convenience store near the bus station. New number, new beginning. The Chicago skyline appeared on the horizon like something from another world. Gleaming towers stretching toward the sky, the vast blue expanse of Lake Michigan beside them. I'd arrived in early autumn, the city vibrant with color and energy. With my limited funds, I found a small room in a women's boarding house in Uptown, basic but clean, with shared bathrooms and a communal kitchen. The manager, a no-nonsense woman named Ruth, required first and last month's rent upfront, but asked surprisingly few questions. "Your business is your business," she said, handing me the key. "Just keep your space clean and respect quiet hours." That first night in my tiny room, reality finally hit me. I sat on the narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, and thought about everything I'd left behind. My career that I'd worked so hard to build. My clothes and belongings. The house Kyle and I had bought together. The life I'd constructed so carefully, piece by piece. For a moment, doubt crashed over me like a wave. Had I overreacted? Was abandoning my entire life an appropriate response to their cruel prank? Then I remembered the casual way they had driven off, laughing at my predicament. The text messages showing Kyle had planned it in advance. The fact that not one of them had apologized or recognized the severity of what they'd done? No, I hadn't overreacted. I had finally reacted. The next morning, I began creating my new life. First priority, a job. So with my engineering degree and experience, I should have been applying to environmental firms, but those would be too obvious. Kyle might think to look for me in my field. Instead, I walked into a local coffee shop with a help wanted sign and applied as a barista. The manager, Tanya, hired me on the spot, more interested in my availability than my resume. The pay was minimal, but it would cover my basic expenses while I figured out my next steps. My second week in Chicago, I visited a small community college and enrolled in night classes for computer programming, something I'd always been interested in but had never pursued because Kyle had dismissed it as not playing to my strengths. I also visited a legal aid clinic, where a patient attorney named Sarah helped me understand my options. Technically, I was still married to Kyle, but filing for divorce would mean revealing my location. "You could file under a confidential address," Sarah suggested. "But there's no legal requirement to file immediately. Some people separate for years before formalizing it." "What about my old life?" I asked. "My credit cards, my student loans, the house?" "It's complicated," she admitted. "By disappearing, you're effectively abandoning those assets, but also potentially those responsibilities. Your husband could claim abandonment in a divorce proceeding. I don't care about the house or possessions," I said truthfully. "I just don't want him to find me." Sarah looked at me carefully. "Was there abuse in the relationship?" I hesitated. "Not physical, no. But ... I explained what had happened in New Mexico. Watching her expressions shift from curiosity to disbelief to anger. "That's a form of emotional abuse," she said firmly. "Abandoning someone in a potentially dangerous situation is not a joke or a prank." Her validation sent a wave of relief through me. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't overreacting. What they had done was genuinely cruel. "For now," Sarah advised, "focus on establishing your new life. We can deal with the legal complexities later if needed." And so I did. Weeks turned into months. I worked mornings at the coffee shop, took classes in the evening, and slowly built a small but reliable routine. I made casual friendships with my coworkers and classmates, though I was careful about what I shared regarding my past. By winter, I had saved enough to move to a small studio apartment of my own. It was a 6th-floor walk-up with questionable heating, but it was mine. I bought secondhand furniture, thrift store clothes, and gradually created a space that felt like home. One snowy evening, about 6 months after my arrival in Chicago, I was returning from class when I spotted a familiar figure on my street. My heart nearly stopped. A man with Kyle's build and hair color was examining apartment building numbers, as if looking for an address. I ducked into a doorway, pulse racing, until I could see it wasn't him, just a stranger with a passing resemblance. But the encounter shook me deeply. How long would I jump at shadows, expecting Kyle or my parents to appear? That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with what-ifs. What if they found me? What if I ran into them by chance? What if this fear followed me forever? The next day, I made 2 decisions. First, I would create a more substantial identity in my new life. I'd been using my real name, figuring there were enough Vanessa Harmons in America to provide some anonymity. But perhaps it was time for a clean break. I researched the legal process for changing my name and settled on Claire Bennett. Claire because it had been my grandmother's name, the only family member who had ever truly accepted me as I was. And Bennett because it sounded nothing like Harmon. Second, I would leave Chicago. 6 months was long enough to establish that I could survive on my own, but the city suddenly felt vulnerable. Kyle knew I'd once attended a conference here. If he was systematically searching for me, this might be on his list of possibilities. I considered my options. West Coast, maybe? Seattle or Portland had strong tech scenes that would be useful as my programming skills improved. But they also felt too obvious, the kind of progressive cities an environmental engineer might gravitate toward. Instead, I chose Minneapolis. Close enough to Chicago that I wouldn't lose much progress in my new life, but different enough to feel like a fresh start. My programming instructor had connections there and offered to recommend me for an entry-level coding position at a small company that developed websites for nonprofits. "You're a quick learner, Vanessa," he told me. "You could have a real future in this field. By spring." I had legally become Claire Bennett and moved to Minneapolis to start my new job. My studio apartment there was slightly bigger than the one in Chicago, with a tiny balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. My new coworkers were welcoming, though I maintained careful boundaries. When they asked about my background, I gave vague but plausible answers. I'd lived in a few different cities. I was taking a new direction after realizing environmental engineering wasn't my passion. I wasn't in touch with my family due to differences that couldn't be reconciled. Not lies, exactly. Just simplified versions of a complicated truth. 1 year after being abandoned in the New Mexico desert, I sat on my small balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sunset and reflecting on how completely my life had transformed. I had a new name, a new career, a new city, new friends. I'd even changed my appearance, gutting my once-long brown hair into a short bob and dyeing it auburn. The woman Kyle and my parents had known was gone. Claire Bennett had taken her place, more confident, more independent, less willing to compromise herself for others' comfort. I wondered sometimes what had happened back in Austin. Had Kyle filed a missing persons report? Had my face been on local news? Had they searched for me? Or had they eventually shrugged and moved on with their lives? I could have looked online, I suppose. But I deliberately avoided any connection to my past. No searches for Kyle's name, no checking my parents' social media profiles, no reaching out to old friends or colleagues. The break had to be complete for my new life to thrive. 3 years passed in Minneapolis. My career in web development flourished as I discovered a natural talent for coding that I'd never known I possessed. I was promoted twice, eventually becoming a project manager for some of our largest clients. I made real friendship, still careful about my past, but allowing myself to be more open about my present and future. I even started dating again, cautiously. Nothing serious at first, just coffee or dinner with interesting men I met through work or friends. I was transparent about my reluctance to discuss my past, and most accepted this with minimal questioning. Then I met Daniel. He was a graphic designer who worked with my company occasionally. Quiet, but with a sharp wit that emerged once you got to know him. Unlike Kyle, who had always dominated conversations in social situations, Daniel listened more than he spoke and observed before forming opinions. Our relationship developed slowly over shared lunches and project meetings. When he finally asked me to dinner, I found myself saying yes, despite my usual caution. "I should warn you," I told him on our second date, "I have a complicated history that I don't talk about." He considered this, then shrugged. We all have pasts, Claire. I'm more interested in your present and future. 6 months later, I was facing a crossroads. Daniel and I had grown close enough that maintaining my careful boundaries was becoming difficult. He'd begun to talk about our future together, about meeting his family in Michigan, about potentially moving in together. I wanted those things too, but they seemed impossible without revealing the truth. Could I build a meaningful relationship on such a significant omission? Could I introduce myself to his family as Claire Bennett, knowing that legally I was still Vanessa Harmon, still married to a man who had abandoned me in the desert? One night, after Daniel had fallen asleep beside me, I slipped out of bed and sat by my living room window, watching the city lights. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to really think about Kyle and my parents. Were they still looking for me? Had they learned anything from what happened? Did they ever truly understand why I had disappeared? And the question that had been hovering at the edges of my mind for 4 years. Was it time to stop running and face my past? The next morning I made coffee while Daniel showered, my mind still turning over these questions. When he emerged, hair damp and smile warm, I made a decision. I need to tell you something, I said, setting down my mug. Something important about who I am. He sat across from me, expression open but serious. I'm listening. I took a deep breath and began my story, the real story. The road trip, the abandonment in the desert, my escape to Chicago, my name change, everything. Once I started, the words poured out like water through a broken dam, 4 years of carefully guarded secrets finally released. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from surprise to disbelief to anger on my behalf. When I finally finished, the morning sun was streaming through the windows and my coffee had gone cold. Say something, I whispered, suddenly terrified that this revelation would end everything between us. He reached across the table and took my hand. First, thank you for trusting me with this. I can't imagine how hard it's been to carry alone. He paused, squeezing my fingers gently. Second, what your husband and parents did was unforgivable. You didn't overreact. You protected yourself. Relief washed over me. You don't think I'm crazy? I think you're incredibly strong, he said firmly. But I also think you've been running for a long time, Clara Vanessa. At some point you might want to stop running and truly claim your life. What do you mean? I mean that legally, you're still married. You're living under a name that isn't fully yours yet. Your past is unresolved. He held my gaze steadily. I'm not saying you need to contact them or forgive them. But maybe it's time to close that chapter properly, on your terms. His words resonated with something I'd been feeling but hadn't fully acknowledged. I had built a new life, but the shadow of my old one still lingered, preventing me from fully embracing who I had become. I don't know how to do that without risking them finding me, I admitted. Daniel thought for a moment. There are ways. Legal proceedings that protect your privacy. I have a cousin who's a family law attorney in Chicago. Let me call her. That conversation marked the beginning of the next phase of my journey, not running away, but moving forward with purpose. Daniel's cousin, Elena, specialized in complex divorce cases, including those involving abuse and safety concerns. Over a secure video call, she outlined my options. You can file for divorce in Minnesota without revealing your physical address, she explained. We can use my office as your legal address for service of process. Given the circumstances of your separation, abandonment in a potentially dangerous situation, we have grounds for a straightforward dissolution. Will he know where I am? I asked, the fear still instinctive after all this time. He'll know you're somewhere in Minnesota, but not your specific location, Elena assured me. And given that it's been 4 years with no contact, the proceedings should be relatively uncomplicated. I decided to move forward. Elena prepared the paperwork and I signed the divorce petition with a strange mixture of emotions: closure, vindication, and a twinge of sadness for the young woman who had once believed in that marriage. 2 weeks later, Elena called with unexpected news. I've heard from Kyle's attorney, she said. He's not contesting the divorce. In fact, he seems eager to expedite the process. That's ... good, right? I asked, surprised by his cooperation. Yes, but there's more. He's requesting a brief phone conversation with you. Not in person, just a call. He says there are things he needs to say. My immediate instinct was to refuse. Why should I give him any access to me after what he'd done? You don't have to decide now, Elena said, sensing my hesitation. And if you do agree, I can arrange it through my office line, completely secure. That night, I discussed it with Daniel. What good would come from talking to him, I asked. Daniel considered this carefully. Maybe nothing. Or maybe it gives you a chance to say things you've needed to say for 4 years. Either way, it's your decision. I'll support whatever you choose. For days, I wrestled with the question. Part of me wanted to maintain the complete separation I'd established. But another part wondered if a conversation might help me fully release the past. In the end, curiosity won out. I agreed to a 20-minute call, arranged through Elena's office, with the understanding that I could end it at any point. The day of the call arrived. I sat in Elena's office in downtown Minneapolis, Daniel waiting supportively in the reception area. Elena placed the call on speakerphone, ready to intervene if needed. The phone rang 3 times, and then a voice I hadn't heard in 4 years filled the room. Vanessa? Is that really you? It's Claire now, actually. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. But yes, it's me. There was a pause, and I could hear Kyle's breathing on the line. Claire, he repeated, as if testing the name. That suits you somehow. I didn't respond to the awkward compliment. Elena gave me an encouraging nod. You wanted to speak with me, I prompted. So speak. God, I don't even know where to begin. His voice had a ragged quality I didn't recognize. 4 years, Vanessa Claire. 4 years of wondering if you were alive or dead. Whose fault is that? The words came out sharper than I intended, years of suppressed anger suddenly finding an outlet. Mine, he said immediately, surprising me. Entirely mine. What we did to you was unforgivable. I know that now. I hadn't expected this. In the scenarios I'd imagined, Kyle had been defensive, blaming me for overreacting. This apparent contrition threw me off balance. You left me alone in the desert, I said, each word deliberate. You drove away laughing while I stood there with nothing but my purse. Do you have any idea what could have happened to me? I do now, his voice cracked. I've had 4 years to think about all the horrible possibilities. 4 years of nightmares about what might have happened to you because of my stupidity. It wasn't stupidity, I corrected him. It was cruelty. You planned it. You booked the motel room in advance. A heavy sigh came through the line. Yes, I did. Your parents and I thought, ... God, it sounds so idiotic now. We thought we were teaching you a lesson about being too rigid, too controlled. Your dad said you needed to learn that you could survive without your precious schedules and plans. And abandoning me 487 miles from home was your solution? I could hear the incredulity in my own voice. What kind of people do that to someone they claim to love? Terrible people, Kyle admitted. Selfish, thoughtless people who didn't deserve you. His candor was disconcerting. I'd prepared for a fight, not an apology. When we came back to get you the next morning and you weren't there ... single quotes, he trailed off. I've never been so scared in my life. You deserve to be scared, I said, surprised by my own coldness. I was terrified standing on that road watching you drive away, I know, and there's nothing I can say to make that right. He paused. The motel clerk, she gave me your note. You'll never know where I've gone or who I've become. I think I've read those words 1,000 times. I remained silent, processing the strange reality of this conversation. For 4 years, Kyle had existed only in my memory and nightmares. Hearing his voice made him real again in a way that was both disturbing and somehow liberating. We filed a missing persons report, he continued. The police investigated, but they quickly determined you had left voluntarily. Your note confirmed it. They called it a domestic situation, not a crime. It should have been a crime, I said quietly. Abandoning someone in a remote location should be a crime. Yes, it should. His agreement continued to throw me off guard. Your parents and I fell apart after you disappeared. They blamed me for taking the joke too far. I blamed them for suggesting it in the first place. It was ugly. I don't care about your drama, I said, though part of me did want to know what had happened in the aftermath. What do you want from this conversation, Kyle? Why did you ask to speak with me? He was quiet for a moment. 2 reasons. First, to apologize, though I know it's inadequate. What I did was unforgivable, and I've lived with that knowledge every day since. And the second reason? I prompted when he didn't continue. To let you know that I won't contest anything in the divorce. The house, our accounts, whatever you want, it's yours. I just want you to have whatever you need to build your new life. I almost laughed. I don't want anything from you. I've been building my new life for 4 years without your help. I understand, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know that I won't fight you on anything. I'll sign whatever papers your lawyer sends. A strange emptiness settled in my chest. After years of imagining confronting Kyle, the reality was proving anticlimactic. His remorse seemed genuine, but it changed nothing about what had happened or the person I had become as a result. Is that all? I asked. Your parents would like to speak with you, he said hesitantly. No. My response was immediate and firm. Absolutely not. I understand, he said again. I'll tell them. Another silence stretched between us, heavy with all that remained unsaid. Are you happy, Claire? He finally asked, his voice softer. Did you find what you needed? The question caught me off guard. Was I happy? I thought about my career, my apartment, my friends, about Daniel waiting patiently in the reception area. Yes, I said truthfully. I am. Good. The words seemed to hold genuine relief. You deserve to be happy. Elena glanced at her watch, signaling that our agreed-upon time was almost up. I should go, I said. Wait, please. Just one more thing. Kyle's voice took on an urgent quality. I need to know ... Did you ever think about coming back? Was there anything I could have done differently after ... after what happened? I considered this seriously. No, I said finally. The moment you drove away laughing was the moment our marriage ended. Everything that came after my disappearance. These 4 years of silence was just the aftermath. I understand, he said for the 3rd time, though his voice suggested he didn't. Not really. Goodbye, Kyle, I said, nodding to Elena that I was finished. Goodbye, Claire, he replied, and there was a finality in his voice that matched my own. Elena ended the call, and silence filled the office. I sat perfectly still, trying to process what had just happened. Are you okay? She asked gently. I think so, I said, surprised to find it was true. That was ... Not what I expected. People can change in 4 years, Elena observed. Especially after something traumatic. I nodded absently, still processing. So what happens now? Now we proceed with the divorce, she said, all business again. Given his cooperation, it should be finalized within a few months. You'll legally be Claire Bennett, single and unattached. I thanked her and went to find Daniel in the reception area. He stood immediately, his face a question. It's done, I said simply. He drove us home in thoughtful silence, waiting until we were back in my apartment before asking, Do you want to talk about it? I sank onto my couch, suddenly exhausted. He apologized, said he was wrong, promised not to contest anything in the divorce. Daniel sat beside me. How do you feel about that? Confused, I admitted. I spent 4 years imagining him as this villain, this monster who abandoned me and never looked back. But he sounded ... broken, remorseful. People are rarely all good or all bad, Daniel said carefully. That doesn't excuse what he did. No, it doesn't. I leaned against his shoulder. But it does make me wonder if disappearing completely was my only option. You did what you needed to do to protect yourself, Daniel reminded me. You can acknowledge his remorse without second-guessing your choices. His words helped settle the confusion swirling inside me. Yes, Kyle sounded genuinely sorry now. But that didn't change the fact that he had driven away laughing as I stood alone in the desert. It didn't erase the years of subtle undermining and criticism that had preceded that moment. He asked if I was happy, I told Daniel. If I found what I needed. And are you? Did you? I looked around my apartment, modest but entirely mine. I thought about my job, which challenged and fulfilled me. I thought about the friends I'd made, the life I'd built from nothing. And I thought about Daniel, whose steady presence had helped me believe and trust again. Yes, I said, taking his hand. I found exactly what I needed. The divorce proceedings moved forward as Elena had predicted. Kyle signed everything without objection, waiving any claim to our joint property and accounts. I requested nothing from him, having built my own financial independence. 3 months later, I received the final decree. I was officially divorced, officially Claire Bennett in the eyes of the law. To celebrate, Daniel took me to dinner at my favorite restaurant overlooking the Mississippi River. As we toasted with champagne, he reached across the table and took my hand. I have something to ask you, he said, his expression serious. My heart skipped. Was this a proposal? We'd discussed marriage theoretically, but agreed it was too soon while my divorce was still pending. I've been offered a job in Seattle, he continued, surprising me. A creative director position at a design agency. It's a big opportunity. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely happy for him, though suddenly anxious. When would you start? That's the question. He squeezed my hand. I don't want to go without you, Claire. But I also know you've built a life here. A safe place. I wouldn't ask you to leave that unless you wanted to. I considered his words carefully. Minneapolis had become my sanctuary, the place where I'd rebuilt myself after fleeing my past. But was staying here still about safety, or had it become its own kind of comfort zone? Seattle, I said thoughtfully. I've never been there. It's beautiful, Daniel said. Mountains, ocean, incredible food scene. And the tech industry is booming. You'd have amazing job opportunities. We'd be starting over, together. He nodded. If that's what you want. As I looked at Daniel, kind, patient Daniel who had accepted my complicated story without judgment, I realized that moving forward didn't have to mean moving alone anymore. Let me think about it, I said, though in my heart I already knew my answer. 2 months later, we packed our belongings and drove west, watching the landscape transform from the plains of Minnesota to the mountains of Montana, and finally to the lush greenery of Washington. Seattle welcomed us with a rare sunny day, the city gleaming between water and mountains. Our apartment overlooked Puget Sound, small but with enough space for both our home offices. I found a position with a tech company that developed environmental monitoring software, a role that beautifully merged my original training as an environmental engineer with my new skills in programming. Life settled into a new rhythm. Daniel thrived at his new job. I excelled at mine. We made friends, explored our new city, and began tentatively discussing a more permanent future together. Then, exactly 1 year after our move to Seattle and almost exactly 6 years after being abandoned in the New Mexico desert, I received an email that shattered my carefully constructed peace. It came to my work address, which was listed publicly on my company's website. The subject line simply read, "Found you." My hands shook as I opened it, expecting Kyle's name in the sender field. Instead, it was from my father. The message was brief. Asterisk Claire, or should I say Vanessa, asterisk asterisk, after 6 years of searching, we finally found you. Your mother is very ill and asking for you. Kyle told us not to contact you, but some things transcend past mistakes. She doesn't have much time left, asterisk asterisk. If you want to know more, call this number. If not, we'll understand, asterisk asterisk. Dad, asterisk. I stared at the screen, emotions warring inside me. How had he found me? Was my mother truly ill? Or was this a manipulation tactic? And if she was dying, did that change anything about what they had done? I printed the email and took it home to show Daniel. What do you think? I asked after he'd read it. I think only you can decide if this is something you need to respond to, he said carefully. But whatever you choose, I'm here. That night, I lay awake thinking about my mother. Despite everything, there had been good moments in our relationship. Her pride when I graduated college, her comfort after my first heartbreak, the recipes she'd patiently taught me. Those memories existed alongside the criticism, the undermining, the ultimate betrayal in the desert. Could I live with myself if I ignored her final request to see me? Or would visiting her just reopen wounds that had finally begun to heal? By morning, I had made my decision. I would call the number not to reconcile, but to verify my mother's condition and make an informed choice about what, if anything, I owed her at the end of her life. Daniel sat beside me as I made the call, his hand steady on mine. The phone rang 4 times before my father answered. Hello? His voice sounded older, more tentative than I remembered. It's me, I said simply. The sharp intake of breath on the other end told me he hadn't really expected me to call. Vanessa, he breathed. You got my email. It's Claire now, I corrected him automatically. And yes. Is it true about Mom? Yes. His voice cracked slightly. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors give her a few months at most. I closed my eyes, absorbing this. I need proof. Medical records, doctor's contact information. If he was offended by my suspicion, he didn't show it, of course. I'll email everything to you. If I decide to come, I said carefully, it would be on my terms. A brief visit with my partner, I would not be staying with you. And I would need absolute clarity that this is not about reconciliation or forgiveness. Understood, he said quickly. She just wants to see you once more, to say goodbye and... I think to apologize. I'll think about it, I said, unwilling to commit further. Send the medical information. Single quotes. After I hung up, Daniel pulled me into a hug. Whatever you decide, I'll be right beside you. The medical records arrived that afternoon, detailed enough to convince me that my mother's condition was genuine and grave. I sat with the information for 2 days before making my final decision. I need to go, I told Daniel. Not for them, but for me. To close this chapter properly. He nodded. When do we leave? Next weekend, I said. 3 days maximum. In and out. As we booked flights to Austin, a city I'd never expected to see again, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. 6 years ago, they had abandoned me in the desert, forcing me to rebuild my life from nothing. Now I was returning on my own terms, not as the Vanessa they had known, but as Claire Bennett, a woman strong enough to face her past without being consumed by it. The flight to Austin felt surreal, like traveling back in time while simultaneously moving forward. As the plane descended through clouds, I gazed at the familiar landscape below, the winding Colorado River. The sprawling neighborhoods, the downtown skyline that had once been the backdrop of my daily life. Are you okay? Daniel asked, squeezing my hand. I think so, I said, though my racing heart suggested otherwise. It's strange being back. We booked a hotel downtown, deliberately avoiding any areas I'd frequented in my previous life. I wanted this visit to be contained, controlled, an intentional choice rather than a surrender to the past. After checking in, I called my father to arrange our meeting. We agreed on the following afternoon at my mother's hospital room. He offered to pick us up. I declined firmly. That evening, Daniel and I explored downtown Austin. The city had changed in 6 years. New buildings, new restaurants, new energy. But beneath the changes, it was still recognizably the place I'd once called home. Walking these streets as Claire rather than Vanessa gave me an odd sense of disconnection, as though I were a ghost revisiting a former life. I half expected to run into someone who would recognize me, pointing and exclaiming, "Vanessa? Is that you?" But no one looked twice at us, just another couple enjoying an evening in the city. It's beautiful here, Daniel observed as we strolled along the river. I can see why you loved it once. Yes, I agreed. I don't belong here anymore. The certainty in my voice surprised even me. 6 years ago, I'd been torn from this place against my will. Now I was choosing to leave it behind, not running away, but simply acknowledging that my life had taken a different path. We returned to our hotel early. Tomorrow would require all my emotional strength. The hospital was a new building on the north side of the city. As our taxi approached, I rehearsed what I would say, how I would react, the boundaries I would maintain. Daniel listened patiently to my anxious planning, offering reassurance without platitudes. Remember, we can leave at any time, he reminded me as we entered the building. You're in control here. My father was waiting in the lobby, though I almost didn't recognize him. 6 years had aged him dramatically, his hair now completely white, his tall frame stooped, deep lines carved into his face. When he saw me, his eyes widened, as if he too was struggling to reconcile the person before him with his memory. Vanessa, he began, then quickly corrected himself. Claire, thank you for coming. I nodded stiffly, not quite ready for pleasantries. This is Daniel, my partner. They shook hands, my father's eyes lingering on Daniel with undisguised curiosity. Your mother is on the 4th floor. She's having a good day, all things considered. The elevator ride was silent, tension building with each floor. When we reached my mother's room, my father hesitated outside the door. She doesn't know you're coming, he admitted. I was afraid you might change your mind and I didn't want to disappoint her. I frowned, irritated by this manipulation, however small. Fine, but after this, no more surprises. He nodded and opened the door. The woman in the hospital bed barely resembled my mother. Always meticulously groomed and vibrant, she now looked fragile and diminished, her skin yellowed, her once perfect hair thin and dull. Cancer had consumed her physically just as thoroughly as bitterness had consumed her spirit over the years. When she saw me, her eyes widened in disbelief. Vanessa? Her voice was a rasp. Is that really you? It's Claire now, I said, remaining near the door. Claire, she repeated, tears forming. You came. I moved further into the room, Daniel, a reassuring presence beside me. Yes, Dad told me you were ill. Terminal, she corrected with surprising directness. I have a few months, maybe less. Her gaze shifted to Daniel. Who's this? Daniel, my partner. She studied him with the same evaluating look she'd always given people in my life, then nodded slightly. Thank you for bringing my daughter back to me. I brought myself, I clarified, not wanting Daniel to be cast as some kind of intermediary. And this isn't a reconciliation. I came to say goodbye. Her face fell, but she nodded. I understand. After what we did to you, ... single quotes, she trailed off, then looked at my father. Could we have a moment alone? Just Claire and me? My father looked uncomfortable but agreed, suggesting he and Daniel get coffee in the cafeteria. Daniel glanced at me, silently asking if I was okay with this. I nodded, and the two men left, closing the door behind them. Once we were alone, my mother seemed to gather herself, sitting up straighter despite her obvious weakness. I rehearsed this so many times, she began, imagining what I would say if I ever saw you again. And now that you're here, the words seem inadequate. I remained silent, waiting. What we did to you was unforgivable, she continued. Leaving you in that desert. I've replayed that moment in my mind thousands of times. Your face as we drove away. Her voice broke. I laughed, Claire. I actually laughed while my child stood abandoned on a desert road. Yes, you did, I confirmed, my voice steady. You all did. There's no excuse. Not one. I've tried to find one to blame it on your father's influence, on Kyle's idea, on my own insecurities about your independence. But the truth is, I made a choice that day. A terrible, cruel choice. She looked down at her thin hands. And I've paid for it every day since with your absence. I sat in the chair beside her bed, maintaining physical distance while allowing the conversation to unfold. Why did you do it? Really? She was quiet for a long moment. I was jealous, she finally admitted. Of your confidence, your self-sufficiency. The way you built your career so methodically while I had given up my own ambitions to follow your father's. The way you and Kyle seemed to have such a perfect life. She shook her head. So when Kyle suggested this prank to teach you to be less controlling, I saw it as a way to ... to take you down a notch. To make you need us. Her honesty was startling. In all our years together, my mother had never been so transparent about her feelings toward me. It backfired, I observed. A sad smile crossed her face. Completely. Instead of making you need us more, it showed you that you didn't need us at all. She reached for a glass of water, her hand trembling. After you disappeared, everything fell apart. Your father and I nearly divorced. Kyle was devastated. We all blamed each other. I don't care about how it affected you, I said, though part of me did want to know the aftermath. That wasn't why I disappeared. I know. You left to save yourself. I understand that now. She set the glass down carefully. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. The life you've built, the strength you've shown, that's all you. Not us. The compliment felt strange coming from her, genuine in a way her praise had rarely been before. Cancer, it seemed, had stripped away her capacity for manipulation. I didn't come for forgiveness or reconciliation, I reminded her. I came to say goodbye. I know, she nodded, resigned. But before you go, I need to tell you something. Your father found you months ago. I stiffened. What? A private investigator located you in Seattle almost a year ago. Your father wanted to contact you immediately, but I stopped him. She met my gaze directly. I told him you deserved your peace. That we had no right to disrupt the life you'd built. Then why contact me now? Because I'm dying, she said simply. And selfishly, I wanted to see you one last time. But also because I thought you deserved to know that we found you, that after all this time, we never stopped looking. Not because we wanted to control you, but because we needed to know you were safe. I absorbed this, unsure how to feel about their years-long search. Did Kyle know you found me? No. She shook her head. After the divorce, we didn't stay in touch. Last I heard, he moved to Chicago. We sat in silence for a moment, the beeping of her monitors marking the passage of time. Claire, she said finally, using my new name intentionally, I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. but I am genuinely sorry for the pain I caused you. And I'm grateful that you found happiness despite us. Not because of us. Something shifted inside me, not forgiveness exactly, but a release. The anger I'd carried for 6 years didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip slightly, making room for something else. Not reconciliation, but perhaps resolution. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. We talked for another hour, not about the past or seeking closure, but about simple things. My work in Seattle, Daniel, her experiences with treatment. It wasn't the warm mother-daughter reunion she might have hoped for, but it was honest in a way our relationship had never been before. When Daniel and my father returned, I stood to leave. We'll be in Austin for 2 more days, I told her. I'll come back tomorrow, briefly. She nodded, clearly tired, but seemingly at peace. I'd like that. In the hallway, my father tried to engage me in conversation about staying longer, perhaps having dinner together. I cut him off firmly. This isn't a family reunion, I reminded him. I came to say goodbye to Mom, nothing more. He nodded, disappointment evident, but acceptance gradually settling in his expression. I understand, but... Will you let me drive you back to your hotel at least? I looked at Daniel, who shrugged slightly, leaving the decision to me. Fine, I agreed. Just this once. The drive was mostly silent, my father occasionally pointing out new developments in the city. As we neared the hotel, he finally spoke directly. I failed you as a father, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Not just that day in the desert, but in all the ways I undermined you instead of supporting you. I can't change that, but I want you to know I recognize it. I nodded, accepting his words without offering absolution. I'm building a good life, I told him. That's what matters now. When we reached the hotel, he handed me a sealed envelope. Your mother wanted you to have this. Read it when you're ready. I took it without promising anything. Then Daniel and I went inside, leaving my father watching from the car. In our room, I sat heavily on the edge of the bed, emotionally drained. That was... intense. Daniel sat beside me. You did amazingly well. How are you feeling? Exhausted? Confused? Relieved, maybe? I leaned against him. I expected to feel triumphant, facing them on my terms. Instead, I just felt sad, for all of us. For what could have been. That's understandable, he said gently. Family relationships are complex, even when they're broken. I fingered the envelope my father had given me but didn't open it. I'll read it tomorrow, I decided. I can't process anything else today. The next day, I returned to the hospital alone, Daniel offering to give me space for this final visit. My mother was weaker than the day before, the disease visibly advancing. Our goodbye was simple. No dramatic reconciliation, no tearful promises to stay in touch. Just 2 people acknowledging what had been lost and what perhaps had been learned. Be happy, Claire, were her final words to me. That's all I want for you now. I am happy, I told her, and realized it was true. 3 weeks after we returned to Seattle, my father called to tell me my mother had passed away. He asked if I would come for the funeral. I declined gently, but firmly. My goodbye was our visit, I explained. That was enough. He accepted this without argument, another sign of how much had changed. That evening, I finally opened the envelope my mother had given me. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small key. The letter explained that she had established a trust in my name, not a plea for forgiveness through money, she emphasized, but a practical acknowledgement of what had been taken from me. The key belonged to a safe deposit box containing family jewelry and documents. Asterisk, do with it what you will, asterisk, she wrote. Asterisk, sell everything, donate it, or simply throw away the key. It's yours to decide, just as your life has been yours these past 6 years. I'm proud of the woman you've become, Claire. Not because of us, but in spite of us. I set the letter and key aside, emotions too complex to untangle immediately. 6 months later, Daniel proposed during a hiking trip in the Cascade Mountains. As we stood overlooking a valley of wildflowers, I said yes without hesitation. Claire Bennett, he said, sliding the ring onto my finger, I love who you are today, and I look forward to loving who you become tomorrow. Bennett Lawson. I corrected with a smile, combining his surname with my chosen one. A fresh start, but honoring where we've been, on our wedding day. I wore a necklace made from one of my grandmother's pieces I'd retrieved from that safe deposit box, the only item I'd kept. not as a connection to my mother, but as a symbol of transformation. Something old, remade into something new. We settled into our life in Seattle, both advancing in our careers, eventually buying a small house overlooking the water. We discussed children, agreeing to revisit the idea in a year or two. Then, 15 years after being abandoned in the New Mexico desert, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line simply read, "It's Kyle." I almost deleted it without reading, my hard-won peace feeling suddenly vulnerable. But after a day of consideration, I opened it. Asterisk Claire, asterisk asterisk, I know it's been a long time and you owe me nothing. I'm reaching out because I'm going to be in Seattle next month for a conference. And I wondered if you might be willing to meet for coffee. Not to reopen old wounds, but perhaps to properly close them. Asterisk asterisk, I understand completely if you decline. Either way, I want you to know that the lesson you taught me about consequences, about respect, about true strength, has shaped who I've become. For that, I thank you. Asterisk asterisk sincerely. Asterisk asterisk Kyle asterisk. I showed the email to Daniel, who had long since heard every detail of my history with Kyle. What do you think? He asked, carefully neutral. I considered the question. 15 years had passed. I was no longer running from my past. I had faced it on my terms with my parents. Perhaps this was the final piece of that journey. I think, I said slowly, that I might be ready to meet him. Not for his closure, but for mine. When Kyle walked into the coffee shop a month later, I almost didn't recognize him. The confident, sometimes arrogant man I'd married had been replaced by someone more subdued. His hair graying at the temples, lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. Recognition dawned in his face as he spotted me, followed by a flash of something like awe. Claire, he said, approaching my table. Thank you for coming. You're welcome, I replied, gesturing for him to sit. You look well. So do you, he said, and there was no flirtation in it, just simple observation. Seattle clearly agrees with you. It does, I confirmed. I've built a good life here. He smiled, a genuine expression without the edge I remembered. I can see that. As we talked carefully at first, then with increasing ease, I realized something profound. The man sitting across from me held no power over me anymore. He was simply a person from my past, connected to me through a shared history but no longer central to my story. When he eventually asked, "Do you ever regret disappearing that day?" I could answer honestly. No, I said. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most necessary. They abandoned me 487 miles from home as a joke. But that abandonment forced me to discover a strength I never knew I had. Kyle nodded, accepting this without defense. For what it's worth, I truly am sorry. Not just for what happened, but for who I was then. I believe you, I said, surprising myself with the realization that I did. And I hope you found peace too. As we parted ways, he handed me a small envelope. I've been carrying this for 15 years, hoping someday I might have the chance to give it to you. Inside was a check, the exact amount I'd transferred from our joint account the day I disappeared. I never considered that money stolen, he explained. It was yours. But I always felt there should have been more compensation for what we took from you. Your sense of safety, your home, your identity. I studied the check, then handed it back to him. Keep it, I said. I don't need it. I don't need anything from that life anymore. He accepted the check with a nod of understanding. You really did win in the end, didn't you? It was never about winning, I corrected him. It was about surviving. And then, eventually, about thriving. As I watched him walk away, I felt the last weight of my old life lifting. Vanessa Harmon, the woman they had abandoned in the desert, had served her purpose. She had been the catalyst for my transformation. The bridge I had needed to cross to become Claire Bennett Lawson. They had abandoned me 487 miles from home as a joke. 15 years later, I was the only one laughing, not with bitterness or revenge, but with the genuine joy of a woman who had discovered that the greatest journey wasn't the 487 miles back to a place that never truly valued her, but the thousands of miles forward into becoming the person she was always meant to be.